learn 3 new things about the dative case today, new uses for the dative that you've not seen before. I want to make sure you have your student notes printed out. We're going to go through and we'll fill them in together on this video. That way you'll learn them better, you'll internalize them, and as well you'll have your notes when you're working in your homework. All right, we need to do a review. We're going to talk about transitive and intransitive verbs first. So in Latin, when we first read sentences, the sentences did not require direct objects. Remember, direct object is also called an accusative. And an action verb in a sentence that doesn't have a direct object is called an intransitive verb. Okay, so here's an example. The queen rules. I've got my nominative here and a verb. I don't need an accusative. It makes complete sense. So subjects and clauses can also have a subject and a verb, but they don't make sense on their own, but complete sentences do. I don't need to know what the queen rules in order for that sentence to make sense. Also, we run. This is a nominative. It's our pronoun and it's our verb. I don't need to know what we run in order for that sentence to be a complete sentence. We run. And then the second thing that we did is we added direct objects, of course, in Latin, the accusative, and we said, I want breakfast. So here's our nominative, I, here's our verb, and here's our victim of the verb. What was wanted? What was the victim of being wanted? Breakfast. Joe is our nominative. What did he do? Action word here, carried. What was the victim of being carried? The turtle. So the receiver of the action is the turtle. Now, I could not just say, I want, and you'd be like, what? That's not a complete sentence on our own. I couldn't say, Joe carried, get rid of the turtle, Joe carried, and that doesn't make any sense on its own. Those verbs require a direct object in order to make sense. So, because I couldn't say, Mom filled. You'd be like, she filled what? Right? It doesn't make complete sense. We offered who'd. So those are, a transitive verb is an action verb. So they're transitive verbs, is an action verb that is followed by a direct object. And of course we know that in Latin as the accusative. Now, a tip for remembering the name transitive versus intransitive is the fact that transitive verbs transfer their action to the object. What is being wanted? The breakfast. What is being carried? The turtle. Transitive and transfer both start with the prefix trans. Now, finally, we learned about giving, showing, telling verbs that often have an indirect object. Of course, in the the Latin, we call that the dative. Here in the sentence. And I told you that these sentences that have a dative must also have an accusative. So remember I told you that narrow, I tell, right? I show, demonstro, I give, do. All of those, you're going to look for indirect objects. You're going to look for the dative. They will likely have them. Now, if I said the teacher told a story to the children. So the teacher's the nominative, told is the verb. What is the victim of being told? Not the children. The story was the thing that was told. Remember the transfer of the action? Okay. But we've got to the children. And this phrase, to the children's in the dative. And I have to have an accusative because if I just took out the story, the teacher told to the children, that makes absolutely no sense at all. I have to have an accusative in order for it to make sense. All right, so let's talk about special intransitive verbs. So a special intransitive verb is a verb that takes a dative object. Remember, I didn't say direct object. It takes what we call a dative object. So these verbs do not take a direct object in the accusative case. So remember I told you always have to have accusative in order to have a dative? Not always. Now we're going to learn some ways that dative is used without an accusative. So in your homework this week, a number of the verbs in your vocabulary are these special intransitive verbs. They'll have a plus DAT after them, just like this in a parentheses. That's the way when you look up in the glossary, you know that it takes a dative, and there'll be also 2 ways to translate these verbs. One with the to or for. So to or for, so pleasing, to please, or it can be pleasing to. So there's different ways to do it. All right, so one that has the normal dative language with the to or the for, and one that does not. So let's take a look at a couple of these. So if I said discipulo, oh, let's back up here first. Puella matri placet. So puella is our nominative, placet is our verb, matri is our dative. The girl is pleasing to. This is the whole verb. Don't think that this is a prepositional phrase, to her mother. It is not here. Is pleasing to is the whole verb. But I can also translate it as pleases. Just plain old pleases. I can use it with a to or not with a to, just depending on what I want. Just like when we have dative sentences in indirect objects in English right here. We have an indirect object, or the dative in English. We don't always have to have the to or the for in there. So Deo paribimus, we will be obedient to God. Here is our dative, and here's our verb with our nominative included. We will be obedient to. So will be obedient to is the whole verb phrase. There's not a prepositional phrase, to God, not this time. It's part of the verb. So you can translate it that way, or you could just say we will obey without the to or the for. Okay. I want you to take your notes and translate these a couple of different ways. So, discipuli magistro placebant, right? The students, here's our nominative. Here's our verb. We know this is a dative ending. And we know that, and we know placebant, if we looked it up, it takes the dative. So I would say the students, one way to do it, if we wanted to do with the dative words, without the dative words, the students were pleasing the teacher. Now, if I wanted to do with the to in there, the students were pleasing to. Take some time to write these down because you'll need it in your translation. And sometimes one makes sense in English and one doesn't, or makes better sense in English. You want to know that there's two ways to translate these. Okay, hostis opidu nocet. So again, we've got the enemy, so our nominative here. We have our verbs, harmful, or to harmful to be harmful to, and opido is our dative because it takes the dative. So the enemy, without the to or the for, harms the town. And if we want to put it in the other form, is the enemy is harmful to the town.